this Windows Phone Tech Talk. I hope you all hear me okay. My name is Pavel. I'm the CTO of Code Valley, which is a software development company that does also training and consulting. And you can see on the slide my email and my blog, so feel free to check it out. And today I'm going to talk about Windows Phone 8. So if you have any questions, just like Amna said, simply write them in the link text window, and I will try to answer them as best I can. So this is the first of 3 sessions, and this session will be about the fundamentals of working with Windows Phone 8. We're trying to develop applications for that platform. And in the next sessions, we'll take a deeper dive and look at more topics. So what I want to do today is talk about the fundamentals of writing Windows Phone 8 applications. Now, I assume you're all C# developers and know C#, know .NET, understand how to work with Visual Studio and so on. If you're a Visual Basic developer, that's okay too. I'm not going to show samples in Visual Basic, but the principles are the same. So what are we going to talk about? The first thing we'll start is the development with Windows Phone, how to get the tools, how to get started, what kind of projects we can use to write applications, and so on. And then we'll talk about something called XAML, which is an application markup language that kind of XML actually, that allows us to build the user interfaces, and we'll take a look at how to do that using Visual Studio. And next we'll talk about elements and controls and see how we can integrate them with XAML, how we can set their properties, how we can use events to do some stuff in the code behind files. And of course we'll meet more and more controls throughout these sessions. Next we'll talk about layout, which is the way to arrange controls and other layout panels to create a useful user interface. We'll see the most common layouts, layout containers, and how to work with those. And we'll talk about properties and events, perhaps from several perspectives. Talk about regular dependency properties and attached properties, and so on. And then finally we'll talk about deploying and how do we debug an application, and we'll see the experience that we get with Visual Studio. So let's begin. So the first thing we want to do when we want to start developing for Windows Phone, yes, this is all the topics for today. I'll show some other stuff throughout, such as navigation, which I haven't mentioned, but these are the topics. Yeah, this is what I'm planning for this hour and a half. We'll see how things go. So the first thing we want to do is get the tools. So we can go to this link, this URL, and just download the tools. They are free. And we download the Windows Phone 8 SDK, because we can develop with that SDK for Windows Phone 8 and Windows Phone 7.5 or 7.1, as it's sometimes known. So we can actually develop with that even in one of the earlier versions. And if you have Visual Studio already installed, then the SDK will integrate with Visual Studio. If you don't have that, then the SDK will install the Express Visual Studio Edition that will allow you to write Windows Phone applications. So actually everything you need to know or to have to write applications is available through that SDK. Now it is important to install that on a Windows 8 machine with Hyper-V support. That means it's a Windows 8 64-bit machine with the support for Hyper-V on the processor level. That's required if you want to use the emulator, which is very important to have, so we can test our applications without an actual device. We will want to test the application on an actual device eventually, but we need that support to get the emulator to work, and we'll see how to work with the emulator very soon. And after we do all that, then everything should be okay, and we can start actually doing the actual development. So how would that actually look? So what I'm going to do here, I'm simply opening Visual Studio. I have a few slides, but most of the time I'm going to demo code. I think that's the best way to learn. So I'm opening Visual Studio. I'm running the Ultimate Edition here, but it doesn't really matter. In an Express Visual Studio, we'll see the same thing, just the project templates will be a lot less than I have on my machine right now. So if I click Find New Project, I can see all my installed templates, and under Visual C#, there's a section here that says Windows Phone. And here we can see a bunch of templates that we can use to write Windows Phone applications. So I want to go over some of these templates to understand what they actually give you. So the first and most basic template is known as Windows Phone App. And this is really an empty application with a minimal set of files, and we're actually going to start with that. A data-bound application is really something that has some predefined classes with some data binding expressions and so on. It's nothing special. We can get to that very easily starting from the blank application if we want to. There's a class library project which actually creates something that we can reuse in another class library or another application. So this is the equivalent of a .NET class library if you're familiar with regular .NET development. We can see here a panorama and a pivot application. These are, again, two application types that are really the same as the basic phone application, but they give you a basic user interface that uses one of the special controls known as panorama and pivot. We'll take a look at these controls probably sometime in the next session. And now we get into something that is a little more interesting. That's an application that uses XAML and Direct3D. So Windows Phone 8 supports the building applications and games using Direct3D, which is part of DirectX. And this is a type of application that actually integrates some controls using XAML and a Direct3D experience that is also written in a kind of interop way to C++. So we're not going to look at these kind of applications in these sessions, but this is useful if you want to write a game and you need a high-performance game at that, and you also want to use some XAML to give some user interface to that game. So this is another kind of option. Another option that was actually the only way to write high-performance games in Windows Phone 7 was to use the XNA framework. XNA framework is still supported under Windows Phone 8, but its usage is discouraged because it's probably no longer going to be developed by Microsoft, so future versions on the phone may not support XNA. So we can still use that, but we should be careful. XNA is a C# or a .NET library that wraps Direct3D access. And there are other stuff here that I'm not going to talk about at this time. I will show, however, that not just Visual C# has something for the phone, but Visual C++ as well. So Windows Phone 8 is capable of using C++ code, which is something that a lot of developers asked Microsoft to include, because sometimes there's a lot of code base already existing that we want to simply transfer or use with Windows Phone. So you can have a Direct3D application, but written in C++, not C# or any .NET language. We can write a reusable component, and we can write libraries. So Visual C++ is beyond the scope of these talks. I'm not going to mention that anymore, but if you are a C++ developer, these application types may be of interest to you, especially if you want to write a high-performance game. We're going to use Visual C# and XAML only, no Direct3D in these sessions. So let's create a simple application and see how that looks and what we get by running that particular wizard. So I'm going to create a new Windows Phone app. I'm going to use the very basic template. Let's call that Hello Phone or something. And I'm going to click OK. And the first thing the wizard asks me is what kind of OS version I want to target. So I can target Windows Phone OS 7.1, which is sometimes called 7.5 on the consumer front, or the new Windows Phone 8. So that actually gives me a different base API to work with. And because our session is about Windows Phone 8, we'll use the Windows Phone OS 8 version. And we'll click OK. Visual Studio works for a little bit. And then we're going to get a simple application in a moment. Visual Studio takes its time sometimes. And this application has a very, very minimal code, as minimal as is actually possible. So you can see there is a page here called mainpage.xaml, which includes a basic user interface that application currently has. So what we see here is that there is an XML here, and that's a language called XAML. We'll talk about that in a moment. But for now, I'm going to get into this markup that the wizard gave me and change, for example, the text here to hello phone. It is customary that application name is written in capital letters, but of course we don't have to do that. And then there's a page name here, and I can write whatever I want here. Let's write something like hello or something like that. And actually in this grid here I can add some other stuff. For example, let's do something simple. Let's add 2 rows to this grid. Now I'm not going to explain what I'm writing exactly at the moment. I'm going to talk about XAML in the next slide, but for now it should be relatively easy to understand what I'm doing here. And I'm creating 2 rows for the grid. One of them has a height of auto, which means it's going to be as high as necessary, and the other one will take the rest of the height. And then I'm going to add 2 elements here. The first one is going to be a text block, and its text is going to be something like hello phone, and I'm going to use a larger font size so you can see that better. And I'm going to close that tag here. We can see the hello phone appearing right away. I'm also going to give this text block a name, such as text, underscore text, for example. And then I want to create a button. I want that button to be on the second row of the grid. So I have to set an attached property. I'm going to explain what that is later. Grid.row to 1, which means the second row. The first row is grid.row.0 equals to 0. And we'll place on the button a simple text such as click me. And if I close the tag, I see the button right here in the designer. That's the button. It's taking all the space here. Let me feed that selection. So you can see everything right here. We can see the button and my text block. So this is a nice experience for the designer. We can see the designer right here. And what I want to do now is try to run this. I want to see how that actually looks. So I can do the obvious thing is to click this button here, or press F5, or press debug, start debugging. This will actually run the emulator. I can see here a list of devices I can use to run my application on. You can see that by default it's connected to an emulator, and there are several emulators that are installed with the Windows Phone SDK that allows me to experiment with different resolutions, and in this case a smaller memory that is installed on that emulator, and I can also connect to the device. So for now I'm going to remain with the emulator and simply press F5 or click that button. The application should be compiled, and then the emulator should come up. Let me bring it up. Here is the emulator. You can see the exact thing we saw in the designer. But in this case, the button is clickable, so I can click that button. And when I click the button, naturally nothing happens, which is understandable, because I haven't done anything to make this work. So I want to stop the application. I can click Stop Debugging here, or press Shift F5. And then I can go to my button and add a click handler. I can write click equals, and then I can write whatever I want, such as on click, and then to make Visual Studio help me generate the correct signature, I'm simply right-clicking the on-click text here and asking to navigate to event handler. This will actually get me to the code behind the page. This is the main page class with the on-click method that was generated for me by Visual Studio, which is now hooked up to the click event of the button. So now I can do whatever I want, such as go to the text and change the property text, writing in C++ too much these days, and property text to something else, such as you clicked the button. And if I run this by pressing F5, the application comes up. I can click the button, and I see that the text is actually being changed. So it's very, very easy simply to change properties as appropriate, in this case the text property, to see something else happening. So I've not just changed a property, I've actually hooked up to an event. So click here is an event, and we can hook it up to a method that will simply run when I do the clicking. And naturally, all controls and elements have their own sets of properties and events. So this is a very simple example, that just to show you how easy it is to get started, to write some simple application. Just for completeness, there are some other files that are right here. So one of them we saw just now. This is the code behind file, which is mainpage.xaml.cs. That's the file where just now, which has my code. But there are other files here. We'll take a look at some of them during this session. And so just bear in mind the other stuff here. We're going to take a look in a few slides. So let's get back to the slides and talk some more about that thing that's known as XAML. So what is XAML? XAML is short for Extensible Application Markup Language. If you are a WPF or Silverlight developer, then you already know XAML. The XAML Windows Phone is similar to the Silverlight XAML in its capabilities. It's not the same, but it's very, very similar. It's less powerful than the WPF XAML. If you've never seen XAML, this might look a little odd or strange or maybe even frightening. But XAML is actually just an XML. It's just XML that gives us a declarative way of creating objects and setting their properties. So I can actually do everything in code if I want to. I don't actually have to use XAML. But as we'll see, XAML makes it easier to do complex things such as data binding, and the alternative of using code is simply much more complicated. So if we take a look at the code I've written right here, the XAML written right here, what we can see here is some basic properties of XAML. For example, when we see a grid here, this is an element in XML. This means creating an instance of a grid. So that's actually equivalent to writing in code new grid. And if we see a button here, that means new button. And if we see elements in XML, they actually mean properties. So in this case, I'm setting the content property to the string click me. And here I'm setting the font size property to the value 40. And here I'm setting the property text to hello phone. So these text blocks, actually, I can create that in code as well if I want to. I can say something like this. New text box. And I can then set properties such as font size, let's say 40, and text with some text. And then I have to add that text box somewhere to the visual tree. Otherwise, that text box actually is going to remain as garbage and not be used anywhere. And I'm going to show you how to do that in a moment. But this is how I can create objects and set the properties. And this is actually equivalent to this line. This is almost equivalent, except for the fact that here I'm getting a name, which is actually turning into a member variable that I can use, a field I can use in the code behind. But setting this text and font size actually is all I've done right here, and it is the same thing. And similarly, I can create a button and some other stuff. I can connect to events in much the same way as I did, as we connect in events in .NET in general with the += sign and so on. So XAML is a kind of shortened way to create elements and controls. For example, I can add another element right here. Let's add an ellipse, for instance, and put it in the second row of the grid as well. So let's put grid.row = 1, and then use the field property, for example, with the value red. If we use that, we can see that the ellipse is actually shown right here. And if we run the application, the ellipse is right here. I can still click the button in the usual way, but the ellipse is somewhere beneath that button because the button has a background that is transparent, so you can see the ellipse that's behind it. Now, one thing you may wonder is how did this actually work? Because the field here, property, got the value red, but what is exactly red? Red is a string, so is the field property actually a string? So it's not, because we expect the field to be something that's related to colors, and in fact, it's a type called brush. So red is a string. How is that converted into a brush? So XAML has some shortcuts that allows us to do things like convert a string into another object. This is done through something known as a type converter. So there's a type converter in XAML that knows how to turn some string, such as red, into a brush object. We can do the same. We can do something similar if I had to create that ellipse in code. I had to do something like this. I would create the ellipse, which is located in the System Windows Shapes namespace. I'm going to simply click the Control dot and allow Visual Studio to edit that namespace for me. And then I can write ellipse.fill, and fill is a type of brush. So the class brush actually is an abstract class. I have to create some concrete class that derives from brush, and technically I want to use here a solid color brush, which is one of the simplest types of brushes, and this accepts as an option a color. So there's a bunch of colors under a static colors class. I'm going to select the red here. So that's kind of the equivalent with the markup we've seen in XAML. So it may be a bit obvious that XAML makes you write markup which is shorter than the equivalent code, because the code can be much more complicated. In this case, we're using a solid color brush, and this is exactly what the type converter does right here. So it's not different, but this is certainly easier. We can see there are a lot of colors here I can use that can give me any one of those special colors, whatever those may be. And of course, I can also specify an explicit RGB value using a hash sign. For example, I can say FF00FF, which will give me something like that purple thingy here. And because every two hexadecimal digits are actually an RGB component. So this is also possible, and again, this is possible because of a type converter. A type converter can take that kind of string and again convert that to, in this case, a solid color brush. So there are sometimes more than one way to do something, and this is very useful. So we can write shorter and more concise and understandable code. So red is easily understandable. So this is one of the things that make the development in XAML easier. Another thing that may be interesting is in Windows Phone, if you take a look at the phone, for example, there is something known as an accent color. This color is the dominant color that the user wants to have right now. For example, if you look at the settings, we can see there is a theme here, and currently it's with accent color called Cobalt. I can change that to something else, such as emerald or whatever, and then I'm going to see that all the tiles by default have this green background. So this is kind of the preferred color for the user. And you can actually use that color in code by using another feature of XAML known as markup extension. I can write something like this: static resource phone accent brush. So what I'm using here is a static resource markup extension. Markup extensions are special instructions to XAML. They always start with a curly brace, and there are several of them. One of them is static resource, which is actually a way to share resources, which can be brushes or other stuff. In this case, I'm using a predefined key for that resource, which always translates to a solid color brush with the accent color the user prefers. So if I run the application right now, what we should see is that the ellipse is green. If I go back to the start and go back to the settings and change my accent color to something else, let's say this thing crimson, for example, and I want to run my application again. Here's my that was a hello something, hello phone. Here it is. There's several hello phones here. That's not the one. It's something else I tried previously. So here, that's the one, and we can see that the color has changed in accordance with the accent color that the user prefers. Now, this is a nice feature, and users will appreciate if you use the colors that they like when you don't have a more specific preference. This is done through a markup extension called static resource. Another feature I want to show you for XAML is the ability to set complex properties. For example, here I've set the fill property, but the fill property is just a solid color brush. What happens if you want to create a different kind of brush, for example, a gradient brush? So the way to do that in XAML is use a more complex syntax that says, let me take the type name dot the property name, and here inside I'm going to give a value to that property. In this case, the value should be a new linear gradient brush. This is a brush that exists, and here I can set the property which is known as gradient stops inside that linear gradient brush. So I'm using gradient stop objects, as that they have two properties. One of them is color, which is the starting color, let's say yellow, and an offset, let's say 0, and then let's add another gradient stop, color, let's say red, with an offset of 1. What you can see now is the gradient brush that starts with yellow in the upper left corner of the ellipse and going down diagonally to the lower right corner and having a color of red. So this is not just in the designer, of course. We should be able to see that when running the application as well. So let's run that, and here's my emulator. And we can see that that special gradient. So in this case, we have a complex a property that has a complex value, which is an object in itself. If you want to translate that, by the way, to C# code, this will look something like this. So suppose we want to give a different fill here. So we'll do something like this. We'll create a new solid color brush. Sorry, a linear gradient brush. Here it is. And then we want to call the brush has a property called gradient stops. And then call add on that property with a gradient stop object. So I can create a gradient stop, and here we can see we don't have a nice constructor. We can simply use properties that say that the color should start with yellow with the offset of 0. That would be the first gradient stop, and the second would be another one. Let's do a copy-paste here. And in this case, the second color should be red with an offset of 1. And then we'll set the brush to the ellipse. And of course, we have to connect the ellipse to the visual tree, but just to give you an idea what it takes to actually create that same brush. So again, we can see that it's usually easier in XAML. So one thing you may notice here, there is a gradient stops property here, and I haven't actually used that. If you go back to the XAML, I've simply provided the gradient stop object themselves. So I really had to write, I should have written something like this. Inner gradient brush dot gradient stops, and then the actual value, which is in this case a collection. So this is how things should have looked like. But I was able to get away with not writing that. This is actually correct, and it works as expected, because this is the gradient stops property, which is actually a collection. And there are a bunch of XAML tricks at work here. In this case, gradient stops is known as the content property of the linear gradient brush. That means this is a kind of default property. If I'm not writing anything, this is the property I mean. And the other trick that's going on here is that gradient stops is actually a collection. So the XAML parser knows to call add on that collection for me, because in XAML it's not possible to call methods directly, only set properties. So this is some of the rules in XAML. So I wanted you to get some feel for how this works. And now we can actually try to read the entire XAML. We can see that what we have here is a phone application page, which is the class we actually derive from. The actual class is called main page, as you can see here. It derives from phone application page. Yeah.
Just 1 minute, please. I think questions for you.
Sure.
Just look to the IM.
Oh, yeah, sorry. About the diagonal direction, yes, we can change that. Not a problem. Here's how to do it, just for the curious guys. So one way to do that is use the start point and the end point right here. For example, I can say something like this: end point 1, 0, and now we actually have an horizontal gradient. It's going from left to right. If I change that to 0, 1, we can have a vertical linear gradient. So there are actually several ways to do that, and this is the framework itself is very rich. And again, if you're coming from a developer background, you'll find very, very similar classes and very similar ways of working in this regard. So I probably won't be able to talk about everything because there are so many options. But you get the idea. We can do practically anything we want. By the way, there's another gradient which is not linear, which is radial gradient, which give you something that's in the circle-like shape. So that's also something that may be of interest. But linear gradient brush is fairly useful, of course. So the other if talking about the other question about samples, there are a lot of samples that you can download from the Windows Phone Developer Center. Just look at that center. There are many samples there in all respects. Perhaps I'll show you some links later. So we can actually look at the entire XAML. So we can see here there is a root element. That root is typically going to be a page. Sometimes it's going to be user control. And it says the actual class name is hello phone.mainPage. That's the actual class name, but it derives from this type. Now this prefix may be of interest. This prefix is actually set right here. It's an XML namespace that says that this class phone application page resides in the namespace Microsoft Phone Controls in an assembly called Microsoft Phone. So this is something Visual Studio has added for me, but sometimes it is useful. All right, thank you, Zaldi. So this may be useful for creating your own custom types. I'm going to take a look at that later, probably in the next session. So we can see there's the phone application page here, and there's the grid exactly underneath. So we may be wondering, what's the connection between the phone application page and the grid? So there must be some property here that connects them, which is simply the default property, and it is. There's a property called content that actually hosts that grid itself. And so we'll take a look at more options in XAML as we go along these sessions, but this should give you a brief outline of what XAML is. It's actually a declarative way of creating objects and setting properties. That's the most basic definition. It actually today XAML is used in many platforms, not just Windows Phone, but also in WPF and Silverlight I've already mentioned, but also in the Windows Workflow Foundation, by the way, if you're using that technology. So that's something that's heavily used because of its declarative nature. It's saying what, it's not saying how to do it. So let's get back to the slide a bit. I'll try to move the screen a little slower to make things not as fuzzy. So XAML is useful mostly for UI, but actually XAML knows nothing about UI. I can create any object in XAML, not just objects related to the user interface, but user interface is the most common usage for XAML. And there's actually a designer. I've written XAML here by hand, which is a good thing to do to learn XAML. But actually there is a toolbox here, and I could have selected that toolbox and dragged items onto the designer surface, and I could have actually clicked some object here and changed its properties using the regular properties window and so on. But I typically like to write XAML by hand because usually it's faster for me. And sometimes the designer adds various properties that I really don't like, so I don't like the designer messing my XAML, so I don't usually use it. But I know a lot of people do use it, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. At least you can see the various elements and controls that are built in the phone, and you can use them right away. We'll take a look at some of these during these sessions. We've already seen something about the ellipse and the button, but there are definitely others. So there is a toolbox. You can use that. But if you want to really learn to work with XAML well, I suggest you write XAML code by hand, and then only then go to the actual designer and use the toolbox. And this is just, I think, better for learning purposes. Another tool that's worth mentioning is known as Expression Blend. Expression Blend is a tool that allows you to manipulate XAML as well with the designer that is a little more sophisticated than the Visual Studio Designer, although in Visual Studio 2012, they are mostly the same. But the tool is more oriented for graphic designers than developers. So sometimes, so designers typically use that, but developers use that as well because it's not very difficult to use and it's more graphic in nature. I'm not going to show you that because I want to save time, but you can try that yourselves. So naturally, what I want to do in a typical application is build some kind of user interface. And that user interface should contain various controls or elements that we can that have some functionality that we want to use or to have. So we have some kind of class hierarchy in the Windows Phone, and we can see some simple classes here. One of them, which is the base, most important class, probably called framework element, is the base class for most, if not all, elements. And we can see the text block we've used is just a kind of framework element. And there's a control class here, which is the base class for controls. What's the difference between a control and an element? Well, an element has some intrinsic, let's say, a view or UI, but a controls view can be customized using something called a control template, which we'll take a look probably in the next session. So we can actually change the way controls look in a more fundamental way. For example, we can make a button look round, which is not the way the default button looks. Another thing we can see here is a content control. Content control is interesting because it allows us to actually change the appearance of a control without changing its behavior very easily in some way. For example, we can see the ellipse here. Let's say let's take the ellipse out for a moment to see the button better. I'm going to comment this out. So you can see the button here, and the button has a content which says click me. Now we may think that click me is a string for sure. And we can think that maybe content is a property of type string, but actually it's not. It's of type object, and actually comes from the content control base class that button derives from. What that means is that content can actually be anything. So we can actually do something like this. I can delete the content right here, and then I can put inside the button anything I want to, which is actually the content property, which is also the default property for the button. So let's write that in full for now. Let's say button.content, and here I can pass anything, but it has to be a single object. So I can use, for example, a panel, which we'll talk about in a moment, such as a stack panel, which can host multiple controls. Let's do something like this. Let's give it a horizontal orientation and put between two things. The first thing I want to do is put an image inside. So we can see there's an assets folders here, and this assets has some images here. So let's just take one of these images for now. This image is not very pretty. Maybe we add let's add a new image. Let's right click here and say add existing item. And I'm going to browse to some of my folders here. Let's take the pictures folder and go to some icons I have here. And let's take this icon, for example. Here's some icons here. Let's take one of them. Let's take an alarm clock. That looks like a good thing to have. I'm going to click add here. I can see the alarm clock added to my project. Here it is. Here's alarmclock.png. And then I can point that image with the source property to that alarm clock. So I'm going to write assets, which is the folder, and then alarmclock.png. And let's set stretch to none, so it has its default size. Something like this. And it looks pretty small right now, but we'll see it's going to be bigger once we run the application, hopefully. Or we can give it maybe a bigger width and height, which is also acceptable. Let's say 70 or something. Just be correct in our case. And we should see the alarm clock. Let's run this very soon. We'll see if this why this is not shown. And I'm going to add another element here, which is a text block with a text that says, let's say, click me. And I'm going to align that in center vertically. Something like this. Let's have another margin, such as give it some breathing space. And let's try this. So if I run this, let's make sure I don't have any mistakes here. So the project is building, hopefully. And it's running. So I can't see the image. Let's see why that is. So the first thing I want to do is look at the properties for the image to understand why it's not showing up. So let's look at the properties. And we can see that this is a content. We should make it actually a resource. And let's make sure I haven't typed that and given any spelling errors. So let's see, alarm. Oh, I have an extra, I had something extra there. So we can see the alarm clock right here. And then if we run this in a similar manner, we'll have our button as we expect it to be. And what's interesting here is that although the button has a stack panel which has an image and a text block, it's still a button. So actually a button can contain anything. And when I look at that button, eventually, all right, so the button still doesn't want to show up. Let me just get rid of that. You've asked about the difference between content and resource, and
Yeah.
I'm going to talk about that perhaps later. But this actually says whether the image itself is part of the resulting assembly or is going to be a separate file with the package that's going to be installed. So that may sound a little weird right now. Let me explain that further in a moment. So let's try that again. Hopefully the demo gods will be nice this time, so we can see the button right here and the image right here. And I can click that, and that's still the same button. It has the same behavior. So perhaps that's actually a good time to see what's the result of the compilation of a project. So let's take a look at that by right-clicking the project and going to Open Folder in File Explorer. So here's my folder right here. Let me show it to you. There it is. So you can see a bin folder here and a debug. And here we can see this file. This is known as a ZAP file. A ZAP file with the extension XAP, the image will be built in compile time because it's actually a static image. So it's going to be right here. Let me show you. The ZAP file is actually a zip file. So I can actually rename that to zip and accept that I want to actually change that. And then I can simply open that in whatever viewer I have for zip files. And I can see right here inside, let me just make this a little smaller so you can fit in. Let's make it a little smaller yet. So you can see that we have inside everything that we need to run the application. That's the DLL we actually built. And there's an application manifest which I haven't talked about yet. And here we can see the assets folder, and we can see our alarm clock.png right here as a content image. So this is why it's possible to see the image actually packed up with the entire application. This is the ZAP file. This is the actual file that's going to be deployed to the phone, whether that's an emulator or a device, doesn't matter. So this XAP extension, which is, by the way, the same extension used for Silverlight applications, is actually a zip file that has everything that we need, and this is the file that's actually uploaded to the store when we want finally to have our application published. This is the actual file. It has everything. This is built here on the side, but this actually has everything. So this is something to be aware of. So this is a button is a content control, which gives a lot of power in terms of what I can put inside the button. I can put inside the button anything I want. I can put images and text. I can put ellipses. I can put even a video file, a media element that plays a video file. Everything is possible, and still that entire entity is going to be a button. It's going to behave like a button. I can still click it in the usual way. That's one of the powerful features of the class hierarchy, that all controls deriving from content control can have any content they want. It's a single element, but can be anything. And we'll see more examples of that in the probably next session. So we have many built-in elements and controls, and we probably want to meet some of them. And we'll talk about some of those during these sessions. If we need something different, something that doesn't exist inherently in the control hierarchy, we can create custom elements. And there's a bunch of ways to do that, and I'll show you that probably in the third session, I think. For now, we're just going to use the regular elements. So we've seen some elements, we've seen some controls, we'll see some more later. So I want to move on into the idea of layouts. We've seen some things about layout already. There are some panels, such as the grid that we've already seen, and the stack panel that allows us to actually host other elements in a particular way. For example, a grid stores elements in a grid-like fashion with rows and columns. And the stack panel arranges elements in a stack panel way, vertically or horizontally. And there's a canvas that allows us to place elements in exact positions. These are the basic panels that exist in Windows Phone. And this allows us to create some complex and flexible user interfaces by combining panels. So a grid can contain a canvas and a stack panel can contain another grid, and so on. We can nest these panels in any way that's reasonable to have very interesting user interfaces. So I want to show you perhaps a quick demo of some other application I want to write. And that application, let me close the emulator for now and start a new emulator. Let's create a new project. And again, I'm going to start with a blank application here. Let's call that Quick Draw. What I want to do is create a simple drawing application, similar to a kind of a paint thing, but to do it on the phone. So let's try to do something like that. And we'll extend the application with more features along the way. So the first thing I'm going to see is, again, my designer, and I want to create some user interface that allows me to work with the application that I want to create. So let's let Visual Studio finish building our application and start being responsive. And here's our application. I'm going to give it a title here. Let's call that, the designer is still making my application too busy. All right, let's call that Quick Draw. And I'm going to get rid of that part to have some more room for, to have more room for the actual painting area. So I'm going to get rid of some margins and that kind of stuff. And let's get rid of that margin. Let's leave that margin as is. So what I want to do here is create a grid that has a border. And that border has a brush that's going to be based on a static resource of phone accent brush. This is the same idea we saw previously. And let's have a thickness of 2. And on that border, which is a kind of container element, to host the canvas. Canvas is ideal if you want to place elements in exact positions, because it does very, very little layout, in fact. And this canvas, I don't want to put anything in here right now. I want to do something dynamically. And when the user starts drawing with his finger, or in case of the emulator, with the mouse. So what I want to do here is to get some event handlers going. So I want to take the mouse left button up event and down. And you might think, well, on the phone there is no mouse. So what kind of mouse are we actually talking about? So it is true that there is no mouse, and there is a mouse actually with the emulator. I'm using the mouse, but in the actual phone there is no mouse. But this is a remnant from the Silverlight API, because this is based on the Silverlight API, and in Silverlight there is a mouse. So it's still called mouse, but actually it should have been called something like a finger left down or something, or finger down. But it is called mouse left button down nonetheless. So we're going to use that. So I want to connect to 3 events. One of them when the user presses the screen, the other when the user moves his finger, and the last one is when the mouse is released. So let's call that mouse up. So this is going to be our canvas, and we're going to connect each of these into some event handler. So I'm going to right-click each one and navigate to event handler. So I'm going to get these event handlers from Visual Studio. Let's see. We're here. Let's navigate to mouse move. And let's navigate to mouse up. So we have our event handlers. Another thing we want to do to make sure that we can access the canvas in code is give it a name. Let's call that canvas, underscore canvas, like this. So x:name allows us to give a name to the two elements, which are then can be referenced in code. Where is that? You may wonder where that x comes from. Well, that x is actually an XML namespace that is defined right here. This is something known as the XAML namespace, which has some special features. In this case, naming of elements. So let's get back to the code behind. In this case, we want to create lines that are based on the user's position, the finger's position, actually. So I'm going to maintain a last point where the last touch was made, and I want to maintain a Boolean value to say that if we are currently drawing or not. Because when the mouse is moved or when the finger is currently moved, we have to make sure we're drawing. And of course, in the real scenario where we're talking about the finger, we can't actually hover over the phone. We have to touch it, but for the emulator to work correctly, we want to make sure that mouse move is called only when is drawing is true. So what are we going to do here? The first thing we want to do is get the position of the finger or the mouse pointer by using the event args I'm getting here, using the method getPosition relative to the canvas. This is what we want to do. So we're going to save that in our point and then indicate to ourselves that we're actually now in drawing mode. Actually going to do some drawing here. Let me just get rid of these namespaces and let Visual Studio add the appropriate using namespaces. So we have some shorter code to look at. So that should be enough for our mouse down event. Now let's go to mouse move. So if we're currently in drawing mode, we want to get the current point where we are. That is, again, calling getPosition with the canvas as the actual, the relative element. And then we want to create a line. A line is an element. It's actually a shape. It's in the System Windows Shapes namespace that we can use to represent a line. We can set some properties here, such as where to start. We want to start from the last point. So that is last.x. And in the y, it's going to be a last.y. And the second point is going to be the new point we got, that is pt.x. And the y2 is going to be a t.y. And another thing we need to do is a stroke brush, so it has some color. So I'm going to define a brush here. And for now, we're going to set it to some constant color. So let's get that namespace as well for brush, because it is another namespace, System Windows Media. So let's take a brush right here. And let's set that to some default, such as a solid color brush, with the colors that, let's say, red. And then we're going to set the stroke to that brush object. And we need to set the stroke thickness so that the line has some thickness. Let's say 1. So I've created a line. Now this line is just an object that's in memory, but it's not attached to the visual tree or to the canvas in any way. The way to attach that programmatically is go to the canvas property known as children. Every container, every panel, such as a stack panel and a grid, and the canvas have a children property. And this actually stores all the elements that are part of that panel. So I'm going to call the add method on that and pass in the line. And now this should be enough. Let me close this parenthesis, and just when the mouse is up, I'm going to indicate to myself that I've stopped drawing. And that is almost everything that I need. If I go back to the canvas, there's another thing that I need to do here, is because I want to handle events on the canvas. By default, the canvas background is null, which means I won't be able to get any event. I have to place some other value in the background properties, such as transparent. This is one of the options I can use. And if I do that and I run the application, hopefully if I haven't made any serious mistakes, this should work. So it will take for a few seconds for the emulator to start up. And what we'd like to do later is try to customize the way this application works by using a settings page. So I'm going to do that. That's going to what to do next. But for now, let's look at the application. And the emulator is starting up. It's usually slow to start up in the first time. Once it's started up, there's no need actually to close that, and we can stay with the emulator for long periods of time. But sometimes the first time is a little long. So let's take a look at the code again, just to make sure everything is understood. We are in the main page here. We have 3 fields here that we're simply going to use in this instance with these events. So here's our phone emulator starting up. We can see that it's now deploying or installing the application, and hopefully that will start up soon enough. And here's our quick draw application. Here's our canvas, and what we see here is the border. So now I can actually use my mouse to draw. So here I'm drawing some things. The drawing isn't perfect because I did make a mistake here. I forgot to set the last property to the current point. So let's run that again. Hopefully that's going to be quicker because the emulator is already running. So here's the emulator. Here's the application. Now it should be better. Let me write some greeting here. So here's an H. Here's an E. Hope you can see that. So here's me drawing something. So it's not that easy to draw with the mouse, but it is easier to draw with your finger. You can try that on an actual device. So what we've done here is actually added to the canvas a lot of lines, many lines that comprise this drawing. So they're all children of the canvas, which is a kind of panel. In this case, they're simply set up in specific positions, which is something that the canvas is really good at. So I hope this makes things more interesting. And what we want to do later is try to change that brush, for example, to a different color, and try to draw in many colors, perhaps change the thickness, and do some other customizations that may be useful. Let's get back to the slides for a moment. So what we've seen here is that we have a single page. Sometimes we want more than one page. We may want to have another page for settings, for example, or some other information. So we can do that by creating another page with the XAML onto itself, create some user interface for that. And then we can use the navigation services class to navigate from one page to another. And we can actually also send parameters to the target page so it knows, perhaps in a better way, what we want to be able to be done. So let's see how that actually works. So I'm continuing my quick draw application. I want to create a new page. I'm sorry, I talk about shaders. What kind of shaders are you talking about? Are you talking about DirectX shaders? I'm not sure. So, yeah, so you can use that with DirectX applications. Yes, you can write HLSL shaders, definitely, and use them with Direct3D. As I've shown, there are projects that support mixing XAML and Direct3D or using Direct3D only. You can certainly use HLSL, for sure. You can try one of the default projects, and you'll see there's an HLSL that's created for you that renders a 3-dimensional cube. I suggest you try that. Okay, so I want to have another page. How do I do that? I right-clicking the project and selecting Add a New Item. And in the New Item dialog box, which should appear right now, I'm going to go to the Windows Phone section. I can see there are several options here What I want to select right now is the Windows Phone portrait page, which is the normal looking page. I'm going to give it a name. Let's call it the settings page. And click the add button. What I'm going to get here is something very similar to something we've already seen. That's going to be another page that is pretty empty. And now I want to set some user interface for that page. So what I want to do here, let's call that a quick draw. And here let's write settings, just to let the user know what this page is about. And then we go to this grid, to the content part, and add some things that may be interesting. I'm going to use the stack panel here, because I want to lay out several items one below the other. And I'm going to place a list box here. And let's say in the list box, I want to place some rectangles. Let's place a rectangle. This is an element. Let's give it some breathing space. Let's have it have some width, such as 200, and some height, let's say 40, and give it some color, such as a solid color brush in the color red. And let's add some of these, let's say 4 colors in this case, and let's have some colors here. Let's have blue and let's have green. Naturally, I can add as many colors as I want. Another thing I want to do is we can actually add some text here to make sure it's understandable what we want to do. Let's add a text block that says brush or select brush or something like this. We can, of course, we have to place that. I want to place that inside the stack panel. And we can, of course, change the font if we want to, but that would be enough. And next, I want to add something for changing the thickness. So let's add another text block with a text that says thickness. And let's add a margin here. So we have some breathing space from the brush. Now let's add a slider. And the slider should have a minimum value of 1. That would be the minimum thickness, and a maximum value of 10. And let's give it a name. Let's call it the thickness slider. Something like this. And let's actually give a name to the list box as well, so we can refer to it in code. Let's call it brush list box. That's going to be good enough. So we have a kind of settings page, and we want to navigate to that page. So how do we do that? So the first thing we want to do is add some kind of user interface to the main page to allow navigation to the settings page. How do we do that? So there are several ways to do that. One of the most common ways is using an application bar. The application bar is a very common and very well known user interface on the phone. For example, if I'm opening some application such as the pictures here, we can see an application bar right here that allows me to have some options here. Some of them hidden behind the menu, some of them may be right here available using an icon. So we can take a look at some other applications such as, I don't know, maybe the People Hub. We can see that this is the application bar. We can see some icons here. We can have several more options right here. So I want to add an application bar, similar to what we've seen right here. So how do we do that? Well, what we want to do is add a property to the phone application page. So I'm going to say phone application page dot application bar. So there's a property called application bar, and the application bar is actually in another namespace that is referenced by the shell right here, the XML namespace. We can see the namespace right here. Shell actually references Microsoft Phone shell in an assembly called Microsoft Phone. So we need that because that is where the application bar is located. It can have buttons. So we can try to look at an icon button. An icon button can have some text, in this case settings, and we want to have some image probably. We want to have some, icon URI. We want to have some icon to look at. So let's take an app bar here and say settings.png. So where would we get, and of course we want to have a click handler. Let's call that on settings. In this click handler, I want to navigate to the settings page. So I can navigate to the handler right here. And I can navigate here, but in the meantime, we can see that there is an icon there, but we don't see any icon. We can see something like this, which is a generic thing here. So I want to have that icon. Where do we get that? So actually, there's a nice list of predefined icons that are very useful on the phone that come with the SDK. So what I want to do here is create a new folder. Let's call that app bar. And then I'm going to open Windows Explorer and go to my C drive, and you go to Program Files x86, and then I'm going to go to Microsoft SDKs, and then I'm going to go to Windows Phone. Let's go to version 8.0, and here we can see icons, and there's a lot of icons right here that we can actually use immediately. So here's something that's usually used for settings. I can actually get that a little out of the way and have that settings right here and actually drag that into the app bar folder right here. You can see it right here. I'm going to simply rename that to settings.png so it's a bit easier on the eyes. And once I do that and I run the application, hopefully, if everything is done correctly, my application should compile and run, which is taking a bit more time than I hoped. So it's running, and we can see our icon right here. Clicking the icon gives us nothing at this time. Clicking these three dots gives us the text, the settings text that we've set up as a property. So what we want to do now is make sure that settings actually works. So that actually gives us something. So I'm going to back to my main page on settings event handler for the click event for that icon. And then I want to go to navigation services, which is a property, navigation service of type navigation service, and call the navigate method. And here I can specify the URI. So I'm going to say new URI, and we're talking about settings page.xaml. And I'm going to specify URI kind dot relative, because that's a relative URI and actually has to be a relative URI. This should be enough. Let's run that. Let's look at the emulator. So the application is running, hopefully. Here it is. So I can do my drawing and then click settings. You can see that we actually move to that settings page. I can select the brush here and even select the thickness. Naturally, when I click back, notice I'm getting back to my main page. Now, of course, nothing has actually happened. I continue to draw in the same color and so on because I haven't done anything to use the settings actually, but we can see that automatically the back button takes us back to the previous page and don't have to do anything to get that functionality. What we want to do is intersect that back call and get that information from these settings onto the main page, because the main page wants to use that. Yeah. So how do we do that? So I mentioned previously you can actually pass information to the other page. This can be done using a query string, which is very familiar in the web domain. I can write here something like thickness equals something or whatever, and then pass that information to the other page. But in this case, that's not very useful for me, because I have to pass complex information. I have to pass a brush, for example, which is not something I can pass as a string. That's not going to be useful for me, but it is possible to pass that kind of information. So what we're going to do is do something else. We want to create an object to encapsulate that information. Let's create a new class. In this case, it's going to be a regular class. Let's call that drawing state. And in this class, I'm going to add some simple properties. Let's make it public and add two properties. One of them is going to be a brush. I'm going to need to add the namespace for that. And let's call that brush. And another one is going to be the thickness. Let's make it a double property, call that thickness. And I want to use that object to pass it around. So to make it available, I can use the application object, which I haven't mentioned yet, but the application object is a singleton that actually indicates where the application is starting. So I can create here, in this case, something very simple. I'm going to create a static drawing state object, sorry. Let's call that drawing state. Let's make it a property. And in a constructor, I'm going to create a new one of these. I'm going to create a new one and set some defaults. So I'm going to set the brush to be a solid color brush, as we've already seen several times. I'm going to bring in the namespace, and that's going to be with the color of red. That's enough. And we'll get a thickness of 1. So I want to have some defaults to work with. So I'm setting the property right here. So now I want the main page to use that. So what I want to do, I don't want to use this brush here. I'm going to get rid of that. And instead, I'm going to use the brush available from the drawing state property using the application object. So this is a static property of the app class. I'm going to simply use that. And the thickness, I'm going to take that in a similar manner from the thickness property. So now that I'm using that, let me test that to make sure I haven't broken anything. So that still should work as expected. Let's let the application run for a moment. So here it's running. And I should be able to draw as previously, so I'm good. But now I can use this information in the settings page. So what I want to do is, when leaving that page, that means when the back button is pressed, I want to update the state as appropriate. So I want to override here a method called onNavigatedFrom. That means when I'm navigating away from this page, I want to use that information that is gained in this page. So I want to do something like this. I'm going to take the thickness, for example, and I'm going to look at the thickness slider's value property. The value should be between the minimum and the maximum. That means 1 to 10. I'm going to simply take that thickness. And the same thing I want to do with the brush. I want to look at the brush, but I want to look at the list box. So we have the brush list box. We want to take the selected item. We know that's actually a rectangle. So I'm going to cast that to a rectangle. And we know that the actual brush is in the field property, so I'm going to simply take that from the field property. That should be enough. Let's try that. Again, building, running. So now I can draw in red with the thickness of 1. Let me place settings here. Let me select blue and increase the settings and click back. And now I'm going to write in blue with increased thickness. You can go to settings again, select green, another thickness. Notice that the thickness was back at 1. This is something I have to take care of, and I will. So you can see a different drawing, so you can have something more interesting to draw. So the only thing that's missing here is that when I'm pressing settings, the thickness is not in the correct position. So actually I have to fix that, and I'm doing that in a similar manner by overriding another method or navigated to. When we first navigate to this page, we want to make sure the thickness slider.value is equal to the app.drawingState .thickness. I want to make sure that is actually synchronized with the current value, so the user knows what the current value is, and then change whatever needs to be changed. So let's run that a final time. So I'm using red here. Let me go to the settings. I'm going to change the color and change the thickness. Go back and draw with that new thickness. Go back to the settings, and you can see the thickness now is maintained. So I can change that, and I know where I'm at. Change it to yellow, for example. Let's draw in yellow, and so on. So we have a kind of simple paint-like application, which is something we'll expand on later. So I hope this gives you a basic understanding of navigation. So we have the backstack, and we can use that in various ways. So the last thing I want to talk about today briefly is the idea of debugging. So we can debug with Visual Studio in a very similar manner to regular applications with the emulator or with a real device. That's also possible. And the emulator actually supports most of the functionality, including support for DirectX, Direct 3D, and so on, and also location, GPS, and the accelerometer. So here's something we can look at. If we look at the emulator, there's a kind of arrows here. We can open that up. And what that gives us is extra control over the phone. For example, here we can see the accelerometer. We can actually press that dot and change the orientation of the phone. So if we use the accelerometer API, we can get different readings and can test some of the functionality we may want to use. Similarly, with location, we can select some location using Bing Maps here, and that location will be transferred if that application is using the GPS, for example. It's going to get these location, these coordinates back to the application. So a lot of things are supported here, not everything, but a lot of things. So we can use the emulator pretty well. So actually, for debugging purposes, we can, for example, place breakpoints in the usual way and run that with the emulator or through the actual device, which is also possible. We can debug on the actual device. And while we get into a breakpoint, we can do whatever we're doing with breakpoints in the usual way. That means we can step over, step into, look at variables, that change settings, and whatever we do with normal debugging experience. The experience is actually very, very good with Visual Studio. And so I've placed a breakpoint here, and the application is currently running. So I can look at the phone, I can start drawing, and now when I'm starting doing something, the breakpoint should hit. And here I'm hitting the breakpoint in the children ed, and you can see the line object here. You can look at its properties that I've set, and so on. You can do anything I normally do in a debugging session. So you can use that very easily, not just on the emulator, but also on the device itself. Because eventually we want to try the application on the device and not just an emulator. So that's kind of the things I wanted to talk about in this first session. So we can use XAML bit user interfaces. We're going to see more features of XAML in the next session. Panels are a way to get some layout going. We can arrange elements. What we've seen until now is actually a very simple layout. We'll see some more complex layout options in the next session. And basically, we have Visual Studio, which provides everything we need to write applications. And it's all actually free. Just download the tools and start building your applications. So if there are any questions, you can simply write them on the link console. You can also write me an email if you want to ask something more complicated. Here's my email again. And thank you for joining for this session, and hopefully I'll talk to you in the next session. Next
Many
Wednesday.
thanks.
Thank you.
Many thanks, Pavel. Really, it's a great session. And many thanks for attendees. And please don't forget the next session on the next Wednesday also and at the same time. So see you next Wednesday. And any question you can ask, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Have a good day.